Hey, thanks for tuning into my podcast. This is Big Head on the Block, hosted by me, Tim Henderson, aka Big Head. Hey, welcome back to Big Head on the Block. Today I have a special guest. I have retired captain and former district commander Mark Browning, who retired from the Baton Rouge City Police. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Tim.
Look, today I want to talk about something that happened in September of 1989. You were a patrolman with Baton Rouge at the time, correct?
That's correct.
When did you start with Baton Rouge City Police, just for some context?
I started in July of 1983.
1983. So in 1989, you would have been...
Corporal out of the Coursey, we were out of Coursey Boulevard at that time.
Okay, and for people that don't really understand, 6 years on the street, being in the mix, you pretty experienced and you pretty much know how to handle most everything. So let's take you back to the early morning hours of September 89. You, and for everybody listening, I had the opportunity to work with Mark many years. This is one of the best street cops I have ever seen. He was able to influence crime, and he was able to solve a lot of crimes that most people could not, just because the nature of how he handles himself and how he interacts with people. I'm going to play you the news footage from that night, and then I'm going to let Mark explain to you what happened and what he was doing that particular night.
At about 4 o'clock this morning, a uniformed officer saw a truck parked near an auto parts store in the 2400 block of South Sherwood Forest. He went back to investigate, and as he was turning around, the truck left the store and was heading north on Sherwood Forest. He followed the truck to the intersection of North Sherwood Forest and Choctaw, where the driver then turned onto Choctaw heading westbound and took off at a high rate of speed. The officer followed the truck without his lights and siren on for time until the truck passed the sheriff's unit. And once he passed the sheriff's unit, both the sheriff's unit and our police unit turned on their red lights and attempted to stop the vehicle. However, at that point, the driver was traveling at a very high rate of speed, and they were unable to stop the truck, and were in fact about a half a mile behind the truck at the time he entered the intersection of Airline and Choctaw, where he struck a vehicle, killing 2 people.
So that was the news footage from that night. And Mark, I want to ask you a question, because in the middle of the night, there's a lot of debates going on now with vehicle pursuits and whether police should pursue or not pursue. But my father was tragically killed in this pursuit, along with Vernon Oliver. You and I have had many discussions about it, and I support the fact that you pursued this guy in the manner that you did. I never had any hard feelings toward the police. But tell us what was going on in the early morning hours back in September 89 and how this pursuit started.
Well, I was traveling north on North Sherwood Forest at Darrell, and there was a pawn shop there on the corner. And I noticed a vehicle. It was a extended cab Chevrolet truck with a camper on it, and it had rammed through the door of the pawn shop. And at that time, we were having a lot of burglaries where people were running stolen vehicles through the fronts of doors of businesses and stealing, doing burglaries. So as I was approaching it, I saw the black male jump back into the truck, and he took off and went down Darrell Drive eastbound. And I got behind him, noticing that nobody else was at or didn't appear anybody was at the pawn shop. So I stayed behind the vehicle on Darrell Drive going eastbound until we made a curve and came out on South Choctaw. We took a left turn on South Choctaw. I was a good ways behind him, kept him in sight. I never put my lights on at that time, hoping I could catch up to him without him noticing.
Let me cut you off for a second and tell people, police don't always initiate their lights and sirens for those listeners out there. And sometimes we try to catch up with people before we engage them. So, this is a tactic that is commonly used in the police world. We don't always put the lights and sirens on to pursue immediately. So let's get back to you being behind them again.
As we were going east or west on South Choctaw toward Oakville and all like that, as he was in front of me, I noticed him go around another vehicle, pass another vehicle at a high rate of speed. And at that time, I saw the lights and sirens come on that vehicle and noticed that he had passed a sheriff's deputy at a very high rate of speed.
When you say high rate of speed, just kind of give us an estimate of what you think he might have been doing. I know you don't know exactly.
He was between 85 and 90 miles an hour at that time.
Okay. And listeners out there, this is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and early in the morning, there's not a lot of traffic on the street. Would you agree with me on that, Mark?
Yes, at that time of the morning, there's not a lot of traffic.
Okay, so when you see these lights, you realize it's another officer, which happened to be a sheriff deputy. So pick up the story from then.
And at that point, the sheriff's deputy, like I said, engaged the lights and sirens on and started pursuing the vehicles. I still never turned my lights on at that point. There was no need till I caught up. We got up to, I'd say between Monterey and Oak Villa there, and I could see the truck was pretty much outrunning me.
He was outrunning you at that time, and the deputy. Were you relaying any information to your dispatch to kind of let them know what was going on?
I was relaying information, and I was talking to other units, other officers on our squad. As we kept proceeding westbound, I observed the truck enter the intersection of South Choctaw westbound at Airline, and at that point impacted I want to say it was a Lexus vehicle, Lexus car driving southbound. And I would say that the impact into the vehicle was pretty much in the driver's door of the Lexus. As I got up to the intersection and got out, I immediately went to the truck, and the suspect was in the truck still and handcuffed him. At that time, then we went on to check on the two occupants in the Lexus, finding both of them to be deceased.
And the two occupants that he's referring to in the Lexus, the driver was my dad's friend, Vernon Oliver, and the passenger was my dad, Glenn Allen Henderson. At the time, and I'm not asking you to get real gory, we've already discussed it, but what led you to believe that they were deceased? Was it just because of the way the vehicle was, the no pulse, or what?
There was the vehicle was totally, and the Lexus that they were in was pushed on its side and pushed probably 60 to 70 feet into a parking lot.
Which used to be the Margot parking lot, right?
Right, it used to be Margot's. Okay. And when I got to the car, of course, the only place I could get to was the passenger side, and that is at the point where your father was, and I was able to grab his arm, touch his arm,
right,
and there was no pulse,
Well, so at that point in time, you realize that two people have died as a result of this crash, that the bad guy chose to run. And this is 100% his fault for all the people that think that police should not pursue. You had two cops that night doing their job, and I put no fault on them. The bad guy who eventually got arrested, and if you heard my podcast before about my time in prison, you'll know his name was Tracy Malloy. So tell me what happened once you realized my father and his friend were deceased. Y'all went back and dealt with the driver?
Well, we removed the driver from the truck, handcuffed him. We had to call EMS, of course. They were called because of the wreck. And if I'm not mistaken, this guy had a broken jaw. All he had was a broken jaw from the impact. That's
what I remember also.
So took him into custody, and at that point, I believe state police was called out to write the accident or to come help investigate the accident. And I continued on with the criminal aspect of the burglary charges on Tracy Malloy.
Besides the charges that would eventually come for him killing my father and his friend, you went back, revisited the pawn shop that he was at. You put charges on him for that. You put charges
Right.
on him. If I remember the story correctly, the vehicle was stolen also, correct?
Right. The vehicle was stolen out of New Roads, and then, like I said, it had a camper shell on it. And in the back of the vehicle was items that were stolen also. We're not sure they all came out of the pawn shop. Some of them were returned to, I believe there was some other car burglaries or something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but
Okay.
there was other items, stolen items in the truck with it.
Okay. And for people that are listening, whenever you find somebody in this capacity that is doing burglaries, breaking into businesses, typically they're not overly intelligent, and they usually leave a lot of stuff that they've stolen from other burglaries or business burglaries or car burglaries, whatever the case may be. They'll typically have a lot of this merchandise on them, and if it's been reported, a lot of times you can link them to multiple burglaries, and that's kind of what he's getting at, you know. So this guy had done a lot wrong, and eventually he was going to have to answer up to it. Unfortunately, I didn't agree with the district attorney's assessment of the charges because I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but they gave him 2 5-year sentences for all these charges, and they ran them concurrent. So you got 2 dead people, you got you got a stolen vehicle and a pawn shop that was burglarized, plus whatever additional charges. So although I agree with the pursuit, I don't agree with the assessment of the district attorney's office at the time. I feel like they failed our family whenever they came back with such a lenient charge, and the judge eventually agreed to it. So, whoever the judge was, in my opinion, holds some responsibility in that also for allowing the plea bargain to go that way. He was young, and I don't know, what I didn't have any experience with law enforcement for the most part. So I wasn't a cop yet, so I didn't really know how to handle the situation. It would be handled a lot different now, and I would make a lot more issue out of it. But you did your job. The sheriff deputy did his job. So let's go back to the scene. Whenever a death occurs like that, just for people in a vehicle, the coroner's usually called, and then there's some investigation by someone usually more experienced in fatalities. Is that about?
That's correct. We had a unit that investigated, even though officers may take the primary or do the initial investigation, it's turned over to somebody else to do the full investigation on traffic deaths like that occur from,
Right.
Either from pursuits or just regular fatalities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I got the opportunity to work with and around Mark for many years. I retired as a lieutenant, if you've listened to my podcast. He retired as a captain. We had probably about a 10-year span, 12-year span in between the time that I started working at Baton Rouge City Police and the time that he was there. So he was always a little bit older than me. And the one thing I always appreciated about Mark is this. He was a difference maker. He was the kind of guy that if something happened, he was going to find an answer. He was going to be tenacious about it. He never, he set an example for people like me, let's stop this crime from occurring and let's target the bad guys. And Mark always did a really good job about that. Now, if you're okay with this, Mark, I'm going to tell people, one day in court, we were in city court together and we were in the lounge area talking, and I asked you to come to the side for me. And I wasn't really happy with a lot that was going on with the department at the time. And I was kind of at a point where, I didn't really agree with some things that were going on, which is nothing I'm going to get into. But I saw you and I called you to the side, and we'd probably been working together, I'm guessing, just say 8 to 10 years. And when I say together, we wasn't always just worked in the same department. We wasn't always around each other. We was never on the same squad, but sometimes we would be on calls together, whatever. So I called Mark to the side, and I got a little emotional whenever I said it, but I told Mark, I said, look, man, I want you to know one thing. It's important for me to tell you this. I'm glad it was you, a real street cop doing real police work, that was involved in that pursuit when my dad got killed, because if it would have been anything less, I think it would have bothered me. But we had a real cop doing real police work, and, stuff happens. The nature of our job in the police world is that we do the best we can, but sometimes there's negative outcomes. And it was important for me to tell Mark this. And, I got a little teary eyed when I said it. I didn't cry, but I got a little emotional. But it was important for me to let him know. So, I always appreciated the fact that you did your job and you was extremely good about it. Let's switch now to another topic regarding police pursuits, because right now in America, locally, nationally, everywhere, people are saying police should pursue, they should not pursue. Louisiana's tried to bring some legislation forward to stop pursuits and to make it easier to sue law enforcement and stuff. So my thing is this. I have been in hundreds of pursuits, as I'm sure you have also, and I'm sure this was probably the only one that ended tragically for you, right? Or did you have more?
Yes. Yeah, that's the only one that I've had that ended with fatalities, yes.
Okay. And I've never had one that ended in a fatality. I have had bad guys, if you will, wreck, but nobody was just, really hurt. But if you don't chase, and you give me your opinion after I pose this to you, if you don't chase, then everybody's going to run. Would you agree?
Oh, yes.
They'll run for the most minor charges. They don't have a driver's license because they just don't own one. They're going to run. The police aren't going to be able to solve the crime unless they just happen to get some video footage or whatever. So to the people that say, let's not pursue because it's not a good policy, what would be your statement back to them?
I believe that pursuits it's a necessary part of police work, vital police work. I believe if you have established enough information and during the pursuit, and you see that the pursuit is not viable, and it's, depending on time of the day or what locations and all like that, and what can be subjected, that people can be subjected to in a pursuit, that's at the time that an experienced supervisor needs to be able to call the pursuit off.
Right.
And but I don't believe that just saying that we never pursue would be a good thing to have out there.
Yeah, and what he's saying is, the different variables involved in a police pursuit, because first of all, number one, especially in Baton Rouge, and I've seen a lot of pursuit policies, the policies are way too long. There's almost no way that you can follow every single component of that policy because there's many, many, many pages. There's a lot that a police officer has to take in mind. And when Mark says an experienced supervisor, if me as an officer engages in a pursuit, I indicate to headquarters, license plate, why I'm pursuing and stuff like that. Supervisor is mandated, especially in Baton Rouge City Police, to monitor the pursuit. You need to give your speed and everything. Obviously, the supervisor is going to know what time it is because he's at work. But you tell him the different things. It's not raining. We're only doing 15 miles over the speed limit. You kind of give them an idea of what you're looking at so they can make a decision. And if the variables involved include, hey, it's 3:15 in the afternoon, I'm chasing this guy for, missing license plate, then you got kids out in the street and it becomes dangerous. So as an experienced officer, a young officer, or the supervisor that's monitoring, it's your responsibility to say, hey, I'm going to call the pursuit off or I'm going to continue the pursuit. But you got to make good decisions. And Mark, as good as me, that prey component of your personality kicks in when you're chasing, and it's an adrenaline rush. I want to catch this guy really bad. But as you get more and more experienced, and that's why you have a field supervisor monitoring, you have to kind of disassociate that prey feeling. A cheetah chasing a gazelle is what I'm referring to. You trying to catch this, not to eat, but, in theory. So the responsibility, if you see a pursuit is too dangerous, is just to call it off, unless it's a known variable, like this person just killed somebody and the risk of him getting away is worse than the risk of pursuing. Would you agree with that?
All right. But what I believe people need to understand is the police do not, they call them a police pursuit, but the police do not initiate the pursuit. The suspects initiate the pursuit.
Right. And
if the suspect is not driving at a high rate of speed, the police are not going to chase him. And if the suspect flees, even if the police don't turn on lights and sirens and follow him, he's still going to drive wild for a long way before he stops and realizes nobody's behind.
And I did a bonus story about a pursuit that I had, and I indicated that I called the pursuit off because he went down the wrong way. I think it was Burbank down there by Blue Bonnet. He got in the travel lane, heading in the opposite direction. And at that point in time, I knew it was a stolen car, but it became too hazardous. So I called it off because of the way he was driving. He actually got back into the proper lane of travel, and I re-engaged him. And eventually we caught all 4 suspects that were in the vehicle. But Mark's 100% right. They choose the course of action. And my statement to the legislators and the people making the laws, the prosecutors, the judges, is enhance these penalties. If somebody runs, you have to make it where it's less advantageous for them to run and just pull over, right? If you don't stiffen these penalties, they're going to keep doing what you're doing. Y'all focus your attention on police and what we're doing. They choose the course of action, like Mark said, not us.
I believe if they flee from the police and somebody gets hurt or somebody gets killed, they should be charged with murder. I don't believe that they should be charged with anything other than because they make the specific decision to flee.
Right.
And their actions, they should be charged with murder. They shouldn't be you sit in jail for a little while because you ran from the police. When you make that decision to run and somebody gets hurt.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point, and I totally agree with what you just said. If you make mandatory minimums for these people to stay in jail, it may stop the person who ran, because you've had hundreds and hundreds of people run from you just like me, and you've called them and you're like, why'd you run? Man, I got warrants. And then you check, they don't even have warrants, right? They don't.
Right.
You got a valid driver's license. Yeah, they think they have warrants. So, people run for stupid reasons. And what Mark says, if anybody's out there that has any influence with the people that make our laws in Louisiana, let them know. If you hurt somebody or kill somebody in a wreck, a pursuit, then you should charge them with murder. And I 100% agree. This guy that killed my dad, he got 2 5-year sentences, and they ran him concurrent, which means that he only had to do 5 years, and with good time and parole and all that. I can't remember exactly, but he didn't do nowhere near the 5 years. He did like maybe a year, at the most, maybe 2. I can't remember exactly.
If I'm not mistaken, he did it in juvenile detention.
No, I'm sorry. He was in the parish prison, Mark.
Was
he I think initially he went to juvenile detention, but they put him in the parish prison once he got his time. And on one of my podcasts, I talk about it, and you probably hadn't heard the podcast, but they put him on a maximum security line that I was working. So when I came to work, he was there online, and I'm looking and I'm calling roll call and I'm checking him face to face, and I see him. I was like, oh. So on my podcast, I put that they figured out that they screwed up and put him there because he was going to get hurt that night. Ain't no doubt in my mind. And I wasn't shy of saying it on the podcast. I was young. I didn't have any experience in the cop world. I was working at the prison. It was on my mind to do some harm to him. So I won't rehash that because it's already on a whole podcast. But let's stiffen the penalties. Let's let police pursue and quit holding police accountable for the errors that these bad guys are making and the decisions that they're making. Is there anything else you can think of that maybe we can talk about as far as educating the public on not holding police responsible, or just how to act or react during a pursuit?
Well, I mean, there's the action of the suspect running creates all the other reaction. Yes, the officers have to, the supervisors and all like that have to be vigilant and listening to the pursuits and use their good judgment to call off pursuits. But the public also has to remember that if just because the officer backs off and shuts his lights and sirens off and no longer engages this guy, is not going to stop this guy from continuing to run and continuing to drive wild
in a reckless manner. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that point up because it didn't even cross my mind. But he's right. A lot of times when you disengage, these guys don't know that you're disengaging, and they're going to continue to drive in a reckless and haphazard manner. People still want to hold the police responsible. Well, you were chasing him. Yeah, but that was 8 minutes ago, he's still running because he don't know that we backing off. He thinks we coming from every direction. These guys that run, most of them are pretty experienced at run. Most of them don't just run for the first time, but they will keep driving in a manner because they think we're around the next corner. They think we got a helicopter in the air. They don't think that they got away for the most part. So he's right about that. And people
don't realize, the public doesn't realize that the majority of the time the people we pursue or have pursued, when they're caught, they're more than 90% of the time, they're high as a kite on something. Right. There's drug and alcohol involvement in all of these pursuits.
Yeah.
They can be, people don't realize that a lot of these people, when they go to do these crimes, they get high before they go do them to build up their courage to do it. And then they get in a car and they drive while they're on drugs. Yeah. And they drive high. And, that all lends to, if an officer backs off of this guy, what is this guy already thinking?
Right. And I had a pursuit, and it's funny that you say that. I had a pursuit one time back in the Lake Cali area, and it's one way in and one way out. So this guy that took off from me, he eventually got on a side street and was heading toward Perkins Road, right next to a restaurant called Heads and Tails. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what happened until we called him. He was running, heading toward toward Perkins Road. And all of a sudden he went into the ditch area, and I had my lights on behind him, but I wasn't putting a lot of pressure on him because he wasn't really driving that fast. And I had like 8 other cars in the area. So after we called him, it took us about an hour to catch him. But after we called him, I asked him, I'm like, hey, bro, why did you run your car into the ditch when you clearly was on the roadway? He said, man, to be honest with you, and I knew he was high because he was doing drugs when I walked up on him. He just wasn't close enough for me to be able to stop him physically. And we had wanted him for another crime previously. So I already knew who this guy was, right? So he goes through the ditch and his car is boom, 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 just bumping up everywhere. And then he crashes into the sign. There was some brick columns with the signs. He crashed into that and he took off running, but it took us about an hour to catch him. But it goes back to what you said. He ran because he knew we wanted him, but he also was high on drugs, which takes away his behavior. Because if he would have just stayed on the street and not been looking in his rearview mirror at me, he would have never ran in a ditch and crashed. So once again, the unknown variable, right?
Right. And another thing I think the public should do is they should, when they find out these pursuits, yes, sometimes bad things happen in pursuits, and they do. And there's nothing you can do about it. But they need to check on the person that's being pursued when they are caught. And they need to find out why is that person still, if that person has a previous arrest history, why is he out, and go to the DAs and go to these judges and find out why these people are out back on the street. Because the majority of the people that you pursue are multi-time offenders. Right. They're not first-time guys.
That's right. That's a fact. And I will agree with that. Now, I was 32 years a cop, and I'm guessing you was either 30 or 32 or 5, maybe?
32.
32. Yeah. Okay, so I did all mine. He did all his with BRPD. I did mine with 3 different agencies, but we finished with a similar time, 32 years. Well, look, man, I appreciate everything. Like I said, I'm glad you were the one pursuing that night. I 100% support you in your decision to pursue. And for those cops out there, all I ask you is this: be smart when you're pursuing. Don't let your emotional attachment to this prey drive make you make bad decisions when you decide to pursue. If it's worth pursuing, pursue. If it's a stupid crime, you seen somebody throw a bag of crack down and you see it's getting too dangerous, be smart, make good decisions. We're not living in yesteryear where me and Mark came up. We living in today's society where everything is judged and analyzed. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. The officers nowadays need to be more vigilant. Just watch out for themselves, because it's very apparent across this country that the powers to be do not support them.
That's right.
And they need to realize that if they're going to put their foot on that accelerator and chase this guy, they're taking their lives and their livelihoods, the livelihoods of their family.
Right.
They're putting that in jeopardy.
And
over somebody who may not be worth chasing.
Worth chasing, yeah. And when we were young cops, man, I think we all kind of came up with the same concept. Run them till the wheels fall off. You have to be smarter, and this didn't just happen, but over the last 10, 12 years, you've had to be smarter and smarter and smarter and decide, is this worth it? And let's get back to the lawmakers one more time. Y'all got to make these penalties harsh. Y'all came up with aggravated flight from an officer years ago, and there's 5 different criteria, if I remember. And if they violate 2 of them, then that automatically puts them in the category. So if you're chasing somebody for a minor offense and they violate 2 of the 5 statutory, whatever they call it, and one would be driving the wrong way or a high rate of speed, then it's ag flight, which becomes a felony. Officers, just because you have ag flight, don't mean that you should continue to pursue. You have to be smart. You have to understand today's world. You have to understand, like Mark said, your life, your ability to provide for your family, your freedom, right? Even your freedom, right, Mark?
That's right.
They want to put you in jail sometime.
And I would tell the officers that they need to petition to the lawmakers or something like that, that as soon as they disengage, their liability goes away.
Yeah.
If you disengage in a pursuit, which is what people want you to do, disengage in that pursuit. Hey, if that guy runs another 5 minutes down that road and he crashes somebody, the police department and that officer should no longer be liable.
Right.
You can't have it both ways. You can't have we don't want the officer pursuing. But we need the officer to pursue, and when he sees and deems it's not necessary to pursue no more, and then it goes down the street, and the guy who's continuing to run wrecks and turns around and sues the officer, sues the department, or sues the city. You see?
Yeah. Supervisors, pay attention to you guys. Y'all smart enough to know you're not emotionally attached to whatever your officer's involved in because you're just hearing it over the radio, most likely. Make good decisions. Police officers, you have a lot of responsibility when you chase. Just real quick, you have to, like I said earlier, you have to indicate your location, the violation. You have to relay to your coworkers where you're going. You have to follow every street sign, because Mark will tell you, if you miss a few street signs and you're in an area that you don't know and this sucker bails out, it's going to be hard to get help to you. And so, you have to keep up with 100 things. You have to know the pursuit policy. You have such a huge responsibility that the public just has no clue how much responsibility goes into a actual pursuit just from the person in the driver's seat of the police car. So protect yourselves. Mark, you're, like I said, one of the best cops I ever worked with and around, and I still support police pursuing. And a lot of people tell me that I shouldn't. This impacted my family for the rest of my life. I was 19 or 20 years old, and I don't have a dad anymore, but it was because Tracy Malloy chose the course of action. The police were doing their job. Thank you, subject matter expert Mark Browning, retired captain and district commander from the Baton Rouge City Police Department.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Big Head on the Block. I'm Tim Henderson, the host. I look forward to dropping another podcast soon. Please give us any comments, likes, dislikes, or any topics y'all would like to discuss. Thank you.